Happy Friday, and welcome here to another edition of Husker Online Headlines. Sean Callahan, Steve Sipple. We got a jam-packed show, and before we get into it, Husker Online Headlines brought to you by StayHome.Care. They are there for you to help the loved ones in your life when you need help. They do everything from daily tasks like laundry, meal prep, assistance with appointments or outings. They are there for you. It's never too early to call and learn more about their services. Call them at 402-205-2233. Thank you to StayHome.Care, the title sponsor here of Husker Online Headlines. But let's get right into the news. And there's no better person to have on to talk about the news going on right now regarding Nebraska than Athletic Director Troy Dannen. Let's welcome in the AD of Nebraska, Troy Dannen, to Husker Online Headlines. Troy, we appreciate you taking some time here. I know it's been a very busy Friday with a lot going on, and let's get right to it. You guys released today that the series with Tennessee has been canceled. And this was a series that was set up in 2006 to be played in 2016, 2017. That got canceled, and here we are today. Kind of give us your thoughts on what went behind this decision on not playing the Tennessee series in 2026 and 2027.
Yeah, and it's really tied to the stadium renovation project. You know, as months have gone on, and we've really gotten our plans for what we want to do, it's become more and more obvious that we were going to be down capacity in 27. There's just no way around it. And so from a financial standpoint, the idea of playing 7 games at a 20% reduced capacity in 27 was going to be a real financial killer. And right now, you know, as we try to implement the revenue share model and everything else, you know, eyes and first and foremost are focused on, are we going to be able to continue to fund ourselves? And we looked and said, we need 8 games in that year with the stadium renovation. And we approached Tennessee and said, hey, are you willing to push this back again? I know we already did it, but you know, we did it at your request last time so you could play that game at the racetrack. But could you push it back for us to accommodate this? And they couldn't, which I understand. And no harm there. This was our decision and our call. And so if they couldn't push it back and delay it, we just canceled the series. We've been working for the last couple of months on who could fit into those games. We had an FCS opening anyway, and that's where Northern Iowa came from. And that had to be filled. And then adding 2 MAC schools to replace games in those 2 years, which gives us 7 and 8 and 27, which essentially, you know, the math works out. It gives us 7 full home games or 8 maybe reduced capacity games. But it's really a long-term financial play based on the stadium being down, at least in part, in 27.
Is there a concern, Troy? I mean, do you expect to hear from the fan base to a certain extent about just the sort of non-marquee nature of these non-conference schedules in 2026 and 2027?
Oh, you know, as a fan, I think most fans would rather us play, you know, Notre Dame, Texas, and Tennessee, you know, in the non-conference. And I get that. You want the games to be as good as they possibly can. You know, having 5 home games in one of those years in the Big Ten, you know, those are 5 marquee games. When we're playing 9 conference games, you know, we're going to get normally 5 instead of 5 in 26. Now we're going to have those 4 A4 games. But this is really, I would say, a short-term blip. You know, the long-term of having Arizona and Oklahoma and I think Oklahoma State already on the books long-term. It really is not a change in scheduling philosophy. It's just we're going to have to accommodate. This is not the only bump we're going to have to accommodate to renovate a stadium to the magnitude our stadium needs to be renovated. And it's just maybe the first one that our fans have felt. Hopefully there's as few bumps as possible. It's during a construction project, logistically, people are going to have some workarounds and some go-arounds, and it's not going to be as comfortable. But when we come out the other side, you know, there's going to be a lot in front of us, schedule and stadium to boot.
Troy, on the reduced capacity season in 2027, how much of a reduction are you talking right now when you look at what the numbers will be for that season?
Well, I'm going to say roughly 20%. Now, where that's really going to be is in the south end zone. And again, I don't have final plans, but to take the south end zone down and then rebuild it is not a 1-year project. It is a 2-year project. And so the idea, and we've tried to attack south from every which way to not go down in capacity, but in order that we have to bring it all down at once, we can build half of it back in a year and maybe put some temporary bleachers on top of a concourse and get as much as we can out of it. But I'm just roughly budgeting right now that we were down 20%, all of it in that south end zone in 27.
The Tennessee matter, we'll call it, occurs as we talk. It occurs in the backdrop of these talks between the Big Ten and the SEC of going to a scheduling arrangement where Big Ten teams would play SEC teams. So is this indicating that is down the road, that is something that's further down the road than maybe most people realize?
Well, I think this is completely separate. If not for the stadium project, there wouldn't be any change here. And I do think the I would say the public rumors, the media rumors that flew around about an SEC Big Ten scheduling alliance, if you will. We just came out of meetings in New Orleans this week with the SEC. That wasn't discussed. I would guess at some point it may come on the table, but it's really not as imminent as maybe some of the things I read about.
Yeah.
We play different numbers of league games. The structure of the playoff, is yet to unfold. So I think there's a lot of dominoes, maybe Steve, ahead of when that decision might happen. But I don't think there's anything that's ever been imminent with that particular concept.
Troy, when you look at playoff expansion, is there a big difference to you between 14 and 16? And what are the benefits in terms of being able to schedule more aggressively if you get the guaranteed spots for leagues like the SEC and Big Ten, knowing that you're not going to get dinged for playing good on good for several more games?
Well, and to your point, you look at what Michigan and Ohio State have done in their non-conference scheduling the last 2 years when they went on to win the national championship. Their schedules were there were no non-conference A4s on either of their schedules the year they won the national championship. Now, Indiana didn't this year. That doesn't necessarily give you direction, but I think we're all trying to figure out what the current playoff model, really how the schedule benefits you and how best to schedule to qualify for that playoff. If there's a different model, we'll have to reassess. Is it 14, 16? Line me up in the 16 column. But I also see where, there needs to be a reward for winning conference championships and the prospect of getting a couple of buys in there. I think there's so much more to it. Just when do we play? The teams that had the buys this year went 0-4, and is that a matter of who had the buys, or is that a matter of sitting out that week wasn't as advantageous as people might have thought it was? So I think there are so many unanswered questions.
Troy Dannen joins us. Troy is just back from New Orleans, where SEC, Big Ten athletic directors met. Others met. I think the two commissioners were there too. What was your two biggest takeaways from New Orleans? Was there something that resembled news out of there?
No, I would say what I don't think the public, we don't talk about as much in a public setting because it's not as glorious or sexy as just the operationalization of the House settlement should it settle.
Okay.
The devil has always been in the detail. It's one, the part of the detail of the settlement is the A4 is responsible for governance of it, enforcement in the regulatory side. It's not the NCAA moving forward from the settlement terms. And so, we don't have answers yet. We don't have answers from everything from, okay, it's 20.5. What happens if you go over?
Right.
What happens if you commit things that you shouldn't commit? What are the penalties? How are we going to enforce that? So I would say 80% of the meeting was really around House and not the the sexy fun stuff that everybody wants to write a column about, but how are we actually going to operate the business next year in this new world?
Troy, I'm curious, in the rev share case, if it goes through, will the athletes, will the numbers have to be made public since you're paying the athletes? And then number two, are you gonna have to pull like taxes and payroll and traditional things, or will they still be kind of 1099 contractors like they currently are with how their arrangements are with 1890?
Yeah, I think the answer to the last part of the question is I think it'll be much like NIL is today. They would be independent contractors. They'd receive money. There'd be a normal 1099. There'd be tax taken out, if you're over $600 in total, and then they're on their own when they go to file their taxes. It's also my understanding that FERPA privacy rules will prevent the individual numbers for student athletes from being public, much like, we don't know who's on a partial scholarship and who's on a full scholarship. There'll be numbers float around, rumor, but we will not be releasing them publicly.
Also, Troy, we're starting to see teams announcing they're going to have spring games, other teams not announcing they're going to, or announcing they're not going to have spring games, like Texas. Is there any news on that front? I guess what I was wondering the other day is how do you go about determining what the April 26th is going to look like? Is that you and Matt together? Do you have a marketing team? How's that all go?
Well, I think from a football standpoint, it's Matt's going to decide what football looks like on that day, but there's going to be a lot more around it, and we have an internal group that involves basically every piece of the department trying to figure out what does that weekend look like. I would say at this point, there's going to be some flag football. There are going to be some alums back. There's going to be some media back playing flag. There may be a whole bunch of different teams, different segments against different groups. I would say Matt and I are both pushing hard for a women's flag game involving Nebraska's, whether it's our top intramural team, a club team, versus an outside team. Women's flag football is going to be a part of the Olympics in LA. The NFL is really pushing it, and so I would imagine that will be a part of the day. I think, and I won't steal an announcement from Danny, but I would guess we will have a volleyball, a spring volleyball game against another college team that weekend. Not in the stadium, but in Devaney.
Okay.
There is a soccer game already scheduled that weekend. So I think it will be. We talked about it being a celebration. I think we'll see a little bit of everything. I think we'll see some skills competitions. I think a lot of what we saw in the Pro Bowl, the Pro Bowl's reinvented itself in some ways, and if you watched it this year, it was actually enjoyable to watch. See people without their helmet and see who they are as a person and have a little fun, and so I think that's the direction this will head.
Troy, you guys replaced the turf inside the Hawks, and we get asked this question all the time.
I know where you're going, Sean.
What is the Memorial Stadium turf going to look like? It's a new product, obviously, and is it going to look like what you kind of teased
it's
on?
It's going to look like Hawks. I think the team boxes will be black. There'll be a little more flair, I guess, if you will, on the sides. But the color scheme, the aesthetic of the turf, the fact that it's one solid color, not variances of green, that is what the turf will look like in the stadium this fall.
Red end zones?
Red end zones. Yep.
Yeah. Was that your idea?
I don't know if it's anybody's idea. I don't want to claim it in case people hate it, but I will tell you that just my perception is we underutilize red a lot.
Really?
I don't understand it. We don't light the stadium at night from the outside. We should light it red every night. Red. It is an intimidating color, and we should use it a lot more than we use it. I'm not talking uniforms, but I'm just talking. I think I've told the governor. I think the road signs, the exits off of I-80 to the stadium should be in red, not in green, not in blue, but in red. So just things like that. It's just how we brand ourselves. So having those red end zones, I I think it's a strong color. And when we put the black letters in the end zones, I think it's a strong look.
And Troy, you guys will add alcohol as well next year to the stadium. What is going on in that process right now? I mean, infrastructure, are you looking at taps going in the stadium, or are you going to have to go with cans this first year? I mean, where are you at with this process?
Now that we have a concessionaire in Aramark, they were on campus this week, and we have a subgroup task force, because we brought in outside security, Homeland Security, to come in and evaluate all of our security procedures and to help us prepare for alcohol, and then what is best practice with alcohol. Aramark has transitioned 3 schools from no alcohol to alcohol, including the University of Iowa a few years ago. So they've got experience in that, but they were first in this week and figured out exactly how it sets up, where it sets up. Part of what we want to make sure of is that as we make investments in the infrastructure, those aren't investments we're going to have to tear out when the stadium project is done and just eat that money. So there are areas we will be able to invest in, significantly now. Areas may feel a little more portable now until the stadium's done, and those renovations get done with the stadium project.
Can we expect, though, a lot of new vendors and food options? I mean, with a new company coming in, I mean, how food's always a popular. Like, what can we expect?
Oh, I sure hope so. I sure expect a lot of different options. There'll be a lot of beer options. There will be other options that are in cans, I'm sure, wine and hard drinks and things like that. The one thing that the athletic department has the right to do is review the pricing, which is, I think, is an important thing, because the idea with all of this wasn't to get in and gouge everybody with, hey, now we're doing the concessions, let's charge twice what we used to charge before. But keep pricing as similar as it was before. I did tell the concessions providers, I'm less concerned with the cost of alcohol. I'm more concerned with the cost of the products that, frankly, all 86,000 people are going to partake in, and not let's not go crazy. Let's try to keep things status quo wherever we can keep things status quo, and grow by growing with new products, the alcohol sales, and in areas that we haven't really contemplated before.
Final question here, Troy, as we wrap it up. The opener will be at Arrowhead Stadium in August. Do you have an update on sales and how strong sales have been for the game down there?
I don't have an I knew the first week we'd sold 50,000 tickets.
Wow.
And which,
that's good.
It's really good. I don't expect there will be any tickets by the time that game kicks. I think that's a lot of the motivation for why Arrowhead wanted the game, for why Cincinnati was willing to move the game, and for why we wanted to be there. Our fans are going to take over, and it's going to feel like a home game in Kansas City. And the numbers were off the charts early on, and I just haven't followed up in the last few weeks to see what's happened since.
Well, Troy, we appreciate you taking time on a busy Friday, and looking forward to hearing more about the stadium and the future things coming.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you again to Nebraska Athletic Director Troy Dannen. Before we get into more, again, we're brought to you by our title sponsor, StayHome.Care. They are there for you, the loved ones in your life. Call them at 402-205-2233. We are also brought to you by Mando. And I was with Sipple last night at St. Michael's at the big Husker event. A lot of people were like, man, what is Sipple wearing? What is that great smell? That's Steve Sipple and his Mando. And if you're not familiar with Mando products, we got a great special with HuskerOnline. I'm just going to call this the Steve Sipple special. The Mando starter pack, you'll get 4 great items in that. You will get an additional $5 off that with free shipping with the promo code Husker. Give it a try at shopmando.com. We're going to give you $5 more off the starter pack along with free shipping with the promo code Husker. Thanks again to Mando for sponsoring us here on Husker Online Headlines. But let's get back into Troy Dannen, because there was a lot there. I tried to squeeze as much out because there was a lot of other things I wanted to know besides the scheduling thing with Kansas City and the concessions and the alcohol sales. But clearly the news is the Tennessee thing. And, he makes a compelling case. They're going to be down around 20% capacity. And by adding in 2027,
by adding a home 8th game, that will supplement the lost revenue that they would lose with the less capacity.
Right. He termed that lost revenue. It would have been a killer, he said, if they had 7 home games with 20% reduced capacity. The word killer struck me. I kind of wanted to follow up on that and say, what exactly, when you say killer, what are we talking about? That was probably enough, though, to hear him say it would have been a killer to our budget. That's probably enough to understand it, right?
Well, then we found out Nebraska wanted to move it down the road later,
Right?
just like what Tennessee did in Nebraska. And let's call a spade a spade. Nebraska was ready to play this in 2016, 2017.
Right.
They did agree with Tennessee to move it to this point so Tennessee could play a game in Bristol Motor Speedway, which drew over 150,000 fans. Nebraska has their own pickle, and they wanted to see if they could punt this down to address this issue, and Tennessee was not interested.
They're not willing to do it. So now it leaves Nebraska, and we asked Troy Dannen about this. The 2026 and 2027 non-conference schedules are light. I mean, they're
set up to go 3-0.
Yeah, I mean, 2026, we'll address this later. In 2026, it's Ohio, Bowling Green, and North Dakota. So 2 MAC schools and an FCS. In 2027, it's Northern Illinois, Miami of Ohio, and Northern Iowa. Now, already I hear from people say, was Nebraska joining the MAC? You're going to get a lot of that. He says that it's his blip. And what were you going to say there?
To be fair, though, this is what Ohio State, Michigan, Indiana.
Mm-hmm. Look at Indiana's schedule. So look at Indiana's schedule this year and look at it next year. 3
Big Ten playoff teams the last 2 years, Michigan, Ohio State, Indiana, have played a similar schedule to this.
What do you think the fans' reaction will be, Nebraska? Varied? It's hard to throw a blanket over it, probably, right?
What's interesting is Scott Frost tried to do something similar with Oklahoma.
Good point. And it didn't go well.
It didn't get off the ground. I mean, the helicopter crashed before it got off the ground on that one, but they were attempting to do that with Oklahoma when, in my opinion, the 21 Nebraska schedule was one of the most difficult we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. 8 of the 12 opponents were teams that won 9 or more games.
There was no reduced capacity on the horizon.
No, but they wanted a win because of that schedule. I mean, that was the toughest schedule in terms of teams that have won 9 or more games I've ever seen at Nebraska. And they were trying to get out of that to get a win, but it was a bad look because that was the 50th anniversary of the game of the century.
That wasn't the only reason it was a bad look. It was a bad look because it looks like you're ducking a team.
And it was 6 months before the game.
Right. It's not this is not the same situation because what Troy's facing is a stadium renovation and the possibility of a 20% reduction in capacity and the loss of all that revenue. So it's not a comparable situation. It's not the reason. Nebraska's not backing out of the series with Tennessee because they're worried about losing. They're backing out for financial.
Because they got to pay a lot of bills to players.
Right. Well, yes. Yeah. Pay a lot of bills, period.
And look,
right?
Danny White's upset. We get that. But as a professional in that role, I thought that was a bad look on his part to come out and kind of throw a little shade on the matter. And, he tried to jump, I believe, the announcement too. Like, they were going to wait till around 11 and Tennessee reporters were going to put it out at 10 ahead of to try to beat the news and control the story of this. But here is Danny White's comments. Correction. Tennessee is not canceling the series. Nebraska did. We are very disappointed that they didn't want to play these games, especially this close to 2026.
Well, that's okay.
He's upset, but
that's okay.
I just can't imagine like AD Tom Osborne, AD Sean Eichhorst, AD Troy Dannen, Bill Moose doing that on Twitter.
I don't know.
I can't. They wouldn't do it. You're saying that those ADs would have done that.
I don't know. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. I'm not going all in on that. Somebody wouldn't do that.
So you're saying Osborne would have done that?
I don't know. I can't I wouldn't put it past some of those guys, though.
I mean, it just is interesting. And
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think I think Osborne might have done, just to put your position out there. We didn't cancel this series, to be very clear. It doesn't really bother me that White did that.
But what we didn't know was Nebraska
It is what it is.
was willing to move it further down the road.
Right. We didn't know that. No, I disagree with you on that point, Sean. Respectfully disagree with you. I think I would maybe have done that. We're not canceling the series, Nebraska.
Just to get this clear.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, other news with Dannen, I mean, they have a lot on their plate. The field turf replacement, the spring game weekend.
Sure.
So did I hear right? They might have some media involved in 7-on-7?
Well, he said bringing back media. I don't know what that means.
Who are they going to bring back?
I don't know.
But have Joel Klatt come and play quarterback in a media 7-on-7 game.
You wonder. I don't know. He said a lot, though. There's going to be a spring volleyball match that day.
So you get the impression that the match in Ord might be off.
Right. Maybe bring that to Lincoln.
And because of the spring game situation, they need something else to anchor in Lincoln.
Yeah. And that would be a big one, right?
And for revenue and fans would attend. And
okay, so then they're talking about flag football, like having a flag football the intramural team at Nebraska play somebody. It's going to be a celebration, and how that celebration looks is on. They're trying to determine that. I was kind of startled by how much he told us in a good way. Like, okay, now we're getting wouldn't you say we have a better idea now what Nebraska's thinking? I would say absolutely we do.
It's just a matter of putting it all together now.
Right.
But then the other stuff, how about Arrowhead Stadium? In 1 week, they sold 50,000 tickets.
It's pretty exciting, right? It's going to be a takeover.
And we'll hit on the St. Michael's thing next, but just you could sense how excited those guys were to play in Arrowhead last night.
Last night we were at St. Michael's.
That's a headline. We'll hit on that closer.
Yeah, we were at St. Michael's and the players were there. And I was talking to Dane Key about it. I don't think, you know what, Sean? I don't think those guys understand what they're getting into. No. I tried to tell Dane Key, do you understand this? Like, it's going to be full of Nebraska fans. And I don't think he totally understood it.
So that's exciting. And then the concessionaires, just some of the changes. I mean, what that's going to bring, the alcohol in the stadium, the food. I mean, there's a lot going on
right
on top of the stadium project.
So the way I understood, they'll put an apparatus in there to handle the alcohol sales that could carry over to the new look stadium, so they don't have to rip it all out, right?
And ideally taps,
because this is happening this season.
You make more money on tap beer, so like I think you want to go to taps in there where you can, and cans can bring a big mess too. I mean, we saw that with the Garth Brooks show when the number I was told was like 125,000 25-ounce tall boy cans of beer were sold. So essentially 250,000 12-ounce cans of beer, in the mess that left behind.
There was a frustrating element of this conversation with Troy Dannen that me and you have done this. We've painted this picture of this Big Ten SEC scheduling alliance in this as being imminent. Like, well, they're going to start scheduling. Yeah, they didn't even talk about it in New Orleans, Sean. It wasn't even a discussion.
I get the sense
that's far down the line.
They definitely don't want to reveal too much of what they're discussing either. And they've done a pretty good job of keeping the details, even leaking them out to the Dellingers and the Thamels of the world.
Yeah, but what you've read and what we've talked about is we've made it seem like the Big Ten SEC scheduling alliance is imminent, that we're going to start seeing these games, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I think that schedule alliance, they need to get on the same page. The SEC needs to get to 9 games first. Like, they have to play 9, and the Big Ten has to play 9, and then they can agree to something like this. But there's a lot more there. The SEC will go to 9 once ESPN makes it worth their while. And that's why right now the Big Ten television agreement pays its members more than the SEC because of that additional inventory.
Yep.
I mean, when you basically give up an entire weekend every year to play FCS directional schools in November, that's not worth any money.
Even in the SEC?
Not even, no. I mean, no one's watching that. Right. It's not a draw.
Now, those games, okay, so I'll give you an example of the draw. Do you want an example of the draw of an SEC playing the Big Ten? Big Ten SEC games, you'll understand this, Sean. There are 5 regular season games in the last 3 seasons, just 5 regular season games in the last 3 seasons that pitted Big Ten and SEC teams, average viewership for those games, 6 million. That's what they're chasing. That's what they want. Okay. The college football playoff semifinal between Michigan, Alabama, 28 million viewers. 28
Well, think about Texas, Michigan this year, what that drew.
Big number. Georgia, Ohio State semifinal in the college football playoff in 2023, 22 million. That's what they're 22 million viewers. Okay, so what is that? That's sponsorships, that's ads, that's just all kinds of revenue that what helps you pay for your players.
The players. And then as you keep creating more inventory like this, it just ramps the deals up. But the key other piece is getting guaranteed bids in the playoff, because once you guarantee 4 spots per league, you can schedule away at your heart's desire.
A lot of this, what we're trying to do here for listeners is put together this puzzle. It's a puzzle that you're trying to put together. Don't you think a lot of this comes down to the Big Ten and the SEC just ensuring that it can get 9-3 or even 8-4 teams into a playoff
with
9-3
with
records,
beefed up schedules?
Yeah,
that produce television ratings and money. And
that's
then
the puzzle you're putting together.
If you're the ACC, you're the Big 12 and the other leagues, this is your worst nightmare. Because if this all goes through, the SEC will have 18 more pieces of inventory, or 16. So that's 16 less games that the directional schools can play the SEC. That's money out of their pocket. And the SEC teams are going to make more money with these games.
It's not the worst nightmare. The worst nightmare would be the SEC and Big Ten breaking off.
And that's the ultimate worst nightmare. But then the additional next step is then the Big Ten and the SEC get together. That's 16 more inventory pieces. So they could create 32 pieces of inventory that make more money, that take money out of the pockets of the rest of college football.
And further, what that does is expand the gap that already exists between the SEC, Big Ten, and the rest.
And then it guarantees the spots, so there's no penalty.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's a puzzle. But they're trying to put together this puzzle. And
then they have the nuclear button. If you don't let us do this,
I think I don't know if they still have the nuclear button.
They could break off and do their own thing. I mean, no one wants that, but they could threaten that. Well, if we don't get what we think is going to help our leagues, we can do our own thing.
Let's not talk about the nuclear button.
the nuclear button. Keep that off. But before we go to headline 3, again, we're brought to you by our title sponsor, StayHome.Care. They are there to help the loved ones in your life. Head to StayHome.Care to learn more. That's .care, not .com. Again, you can learn more about StayHome.Care or call 402-205-2233. Our heart is with you because we put our heart in everything we do. Your home, our care. StayHome.Care. We're also brought to you by Factor. It's the time of year where you're trying to eat healthy. You're trying to eat right. You don't have time to do much. You just want to take something to work on the go, heat it up, but you want it to be a healthy, good option. Well, Factor has you covered. They have so many different personalized meals. They come never frozen, always fresh, boxed up, ready to take with you to work. They'll send you whatever you want. They have tons of choices and options, 40 options across 8 dietary preferences. You can go Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Keto, you name it. Lose 8 pounds to 8 pounds in 8 weeks with the Factor Keto meals. Whatever you want, they have the option for you, and they deliver it right to your door. And we've got a great deal. We're going to give you 50% off your first box plus free shipping. All you need to do is use the promo code Factor Podcast. Go to factormeals.com/Factor Podcast. And again, that promo code is Factor Podcast to receive 50% off your first box along with free shipping. Thanks again to Factor for sponsoring us here on the Husker Online Show. But we talked about the schedules. Let's analyze them, Sip. As we start to look at 2026 for Nebraska now without Tennessee, the Huskers will open that year with Ohio. Then they play Bowling Green.
2 MAC schools,
and then North Dakota. So, when you talk about history of non-conference schedules, that might be about as the 26 and 27 schedules are about as favorable as you're going to see. But then get into the Big Ten draw.
Okay, so here's the Big Ten draw. Now this is what adds balance to the conversation. Here's Nebraska's 2026 Big Ten draw. Home games against Indiana, Maryland, Ohio State, and Washington. The away games really got my attention. Illinois away, Iowa away, Michigan State away, Oregon away at Rutgers. Okay, see, that's why now my stance, Sean, has always been basically since Nebraska joined the Big Ten, I don't care who they play in the non-conference because the conference schedule's so loaded up. And that is a loaded up conference. Now, I would say this non-conference schedule sort of testing me a little bit.
I will say the home schedule's that is not a good home schedule. So you got those 3 games.
You got Ohio State and Washington.
Yeah, but is Washington going to be? I mean, this is not Don James's Washington with Nick Saban as an assistant coach.
You don't know that.
Well, they got a ways to go to get there.
They do.
Maryland, they're kind of a disaster right now. They've lost their coordinators and like who knows where Maryland and Indiana. I mean, Indiana, who knows? But on paper, that is not like a home schedule other than Ohio State.
Not great.
But yeah, the road games.
I'm going to say though, it's not terrible.
I always like to look at these games on the road and like pick your Friday game on the Friday. I mean, Illinois and Rutgers. One of those will be your Friday game. By the way, Scott Docterman did his Friday projections. He's got Nebraska UCLA this year as his projected Friday game.
Okay.
For Nebraska.
Hey, that away schedule, you would agree, is a bear. I mean, that is a bear.
Yeah, assuming Bielema and will Ferentz be coaching in Iowa at that point? Michigan State, you don't know what they're going to be, but yeah, Oregon, and then I mean, I don't think it's that bad. I'll be honest. Iowa and Oregon, yes, but Illinois, Michigan State, and Rutgers are not daunting road.
Well, you got to go to Rutgers,
but the travel,
right? You're traveling, you're crisscrossing the country. Tough schedule. 2027.
Kind of the same setup in that sense, but there will be 8 home games, which is the first time Nebraska's had 8 home games since 2013. And that happened when Nebraska bought Southern Miss out of their game that was going to be played in New Orleans. And they moved the game to Lincoln.
And to review, Nebraska couldn't afford in 2027 to have 7 home games with 20% reduced capacity, mostly, if not all, in the south end zone, right?
So Northern Illinois and Miami of Ohio and Northern Iowa. Those are,
that's MAC, and FCS.
So, and did you pick this up too? Dannen said we had an FCS opening. So Nebraska wants to play an FCS game, it sounds like now every year, 1 per year.
I didn't pick up on that.
He said we had an FCS opening, and then we added Northern Iowa. Those were his words with us. But then the road schedule: Columbus, you go to Ohio State, Washington, Wisconsin, Northwestern. I think that's a tough road schedule. Ohio State and Seattle's a loud place, tough place, and Wisconsin's tough. Those are 3 tough games.
Home.
Where you could have some night games in there. Nebraska's not played in Evanston since 2020.
Okay.
That will be their first trip there since COVID.
In the home games.
Minnesota, Iowa, Oregon, Purdue, Rutgers.
Now the 2027 schedule is more forgiving than a 2026 schedule. In fact, the 2027 schedule, that's kind of the schedule where you want to make your hay. You really want to make some hay. If you're Matt Rule and you're thinking big picture, I think you're looking at 2027 and saying we should make a run.
This is way out there, but if Dylan Raiola were to stay for 4 years, that would be his final year.
Make a run.
But who knows?
No, you don't know that. It's hard to predict in this climate, this player movement climate, who's going to be here and who's not. It's hard to say. You have some guys that come to mind that would be it'd be pretty nice to have Isaiah Hunter still here. He's got 3 years, right?
Right.
There's some guys that were at St. Michael's last night. We'll save that conversation.
Let's transition. Okay. Let's go to headline 4. Again, we're brought to you by StayHome.Care, the title sponsor of the HuskerOnline Headline Show. They're there for you and the loved ones in your life to help you with simple tasks. call them to learn more. It's never too early. You might have someone that's having a surgery. You might have someone that just needs some assistance for a few months. Call them, learn about what they can do for you at 402-205-2233. Our heart is with you because we put our heart in everything we do. Your home, our care, StayHome.Care. But let's get into the St. Michael's Husker event, Sip. I've been putting on this event. It is the school my daughters attend. It is the church that I belong to. I grew up obviously in Catholic schools in Omaha and South Omaha. But 10
What a night.
10, 12 years ago, I wanted to do something like, why can't I do something like I do in Omaha and all the places that we travel around right where I live. So we put on this event, and it started out 10, 12 years ago with like 60 people.
Is that right?
And now
that's what you got?
Now we draw between 400 and 500, raise tens of thousands of dollars for charities. And, it's the largest one of its kind in the state.
I was startled by it, how big it was. That's the first time I've ever went.
So our players were left to right, Williams Winery, Desan McCullough, and Marquise Watson Trent on defense. And then Dane Key, left to right at wide receiver, and Isaiah Hunter, a transfer from Cal. Those were our 5 players. Then our coaches that were there for Nebraska, we had Jamar Mosey, key Kansas City recruiter and former Kansas City high school coach.
Now receivers coach at Nebraska.
Assistant receiver. Yeah, John Butler was there, the defensive coordinator. Then Vince Ginta, the senior personnel and recruiting member of the staff. But what were your takeaways of just the speakers, Sip?
I have a lot of takeaways. It was a great night for a columnist to be there because there was a lot of information. And this was your first chance to kind of get to know some of these guys. I didn't get to know all of them, but I talked to Williams Winery. I talked a lot to Dane Key, met Isaiah Hunter. Takeaways. Dane Key is very affable. His story's kind of interesting. He grew up 10 minutes from the Kentucky campus, but he said it was just time. It was time to leave. He had 3. He didn't like, you got the impression he didn't like having 3 coordinators in 3 years. But the biggest reason he probably came here was Dylan Raiola.
Did you hear the question to him about Mark Stoops?
What was that?
Somebody asked him to compare Mark Stoops to Matt Rule, and he just kind of.
Dane's right there. He's very diplomatic. He's just
he's a leader. You can tell. And I thought Hunter came off well too.
They all did. I mean, all of them are all interesting in their own right that way. One big impression was, I'm scrolling to my notes, what Jamar Mosey said about Williams. Help me with his last name. Winery. Mosey, who was a Kansas City high school coach last year, he says one of the most highly recruited players in the history of Kansas City. Okay. One of the most, now when he walks in, it's just, remember what I said when I saw his film, Williams Winery in high school? I said, he kind of reminds me of a bigger version of Randy Gregory.
And he's 270 last night, they said.
He's 6'6", 270. When he walked in the door, I thought, yep, bigger version of Randy Gregory. Now, can he play like that? Mosey said, special football player. It's our job as coaches to get that out of him. Okay? That's it. That nails it in my mind. You have that guy, and you saw him walk in, Sean. There's not that many guys that look like that and that move like that. If you watch his film, you're like, how's that even possible? But you got to get it out of him. That's Missouri. Something wasn't right at Missouri, and now Nebraska will try to get it out of him.
And man, Jamar Mosey, just hearing his story, and it just puts into perspective to me, there are a lot of good guys just like Jamar Mosey coaching in high school football, right, that just don't get their shot.
Don't get the shot.
Just like in our end, there's a lot of good people that are announcers and analysts and writers that just don't get their shot to get a great break or opportunity. And here's a guy that a year ago at this time, he shared the story. He was driving to work high school football, going as a teacher.
He said sometimes, last night, Jamar Mosey said, sometimes I'm driving to work and I literally think I can't believe where I'm at right now. He's driving to work in Lincoln, and he says, I can't even believe where I'm at. He was a high school coach last year in Kansas City. Now he's speaking at your event. He said I'd never done anything like this. in front of 500 people answering questions.
And he was amazing.
Yeah, he was really good. And Mosey's, he's really important in all of this. He's important because these Kansas City guys like Deshaun McCullough are there. Deshaun McCullough, another player, makes a huge impression on you with his length. Like, there's a 6'5" Jack linebacker standing there. He's all of 6 foot.
And right now they said he would be in Phil Simpson's room.
Jack, right?
Yeah, the edge Jack,
linebacker.
yeah.
Now they're going to move. John Butler talked about it. And John Butler, you can tell, is excited by McCullough. McCullough's big in their plans. That's very evident.
As is Winery.
Yeah. They got to affect the passer. John always calls it affecting the passer. And that's what they're going to ask. They're going to ask McCullough to do that. And I think you'll say he's a jack, but he's going to move around. They're going to move him around.
And I also picked up that the bowl game was a big appetizer of what direction he's taking the defense.
If you just go back and watch the Pinstripe Bowl against Boston College, that looks like what the defense will be. Very aggressive. That'll, come on. Most people say, of course, the defense is an aggressive defense. What will Butler's defense look like exactly? It'll be very multiple. He didn't want to give away too much about it. Why would he?
Just for me, we just don't get an opportunity though to sit down and have John Butler in that setting. So it was, and for the fans, that's the main. We're trying to raise money for a good cause, but we also want to give the fans a great product because the fans are the program.
Oh yeah, 100%, and they got a good look at these kind of key players. Dane Key saying he really didn't like what he was hearing from the NFL. That's partially why he's here. He didn't like what he was hearing from the NFL. He didn't like that Kentucky had 3 offensive coordinators in a 3-year period. You hear a guy like, it was funny, Marquise Watson-Trent saying he enjoyed mat drills. He enjoys them. Marquise Watson-Trent right there.
Grown man.
Far right.
He had his fiance with him last night.
Right. He's a grown man. He's a smallish linebacker, but he loves football. I was really taken by the fact he says, I enjoy mat drills. They're fun. People are like, whoa, really? But he said, he loves football.
And the mat drills started on Friday morning at 5:30. So, those players, when they were done, they got out of there because they had to get to bed.
Yeah. And it's hard. Those things are hard. And John Butler talked about that. He goes, yeah, we try to break them down. We try to crush them in mat drills. And then in this climate, you have to kind of recruit them to stay. Guys that get upset or whatever. It's really hard. One thing about Butler is he's really frank about the climate. Like, if you're not a have in this world, in this college football world, if you're not a have program, if you don't have the money, you don't have McCullough, you don't have Winery, you don't have Key, you don't have Isaiah Hunter.
They don't just
you don't
come
have
here.
No, you don't have those guys. They're
They
not
don't come
coming
here for the great tradition.
No, they don't come here for the culture. They kind of do. Like Dane Key said, the culture is part of it.
That's kind of a bullet point to what you sell.
Yeah.
With the money, with this, with that.
Well, the coaches, I don't think that John, John wouldn't say it too much publicly, but yeah, that's, if you're a coach, you want to be at a place like Nebraska because you can get those players. Those players aren't available to you at a lot of places.
Now, the other, Vince Ginta was outstanding as well. And you weren't up there.
He's the recruiting coordinator.
You were up there for his portion. I thought the part, just the challenges with what you face. And he was in the wedding of the general manager of Ohio State. And that guy basically said this, all the money, all the things that they've done at Ohio State, it was stressful.
Really? And
just managing that team and that roster. And it was one of his hardest years, he said, in football. But then they go win the national championship.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the line you have to walk now. Like, what's the old song, "Mo money, mo problems"? And for recruiters, did you pick up the part where he said just some of the things he's heard people want now in recruiting?
Oh boy.
Were you there for that?
No.
Oh, you left for that part.
Left,
okay. You left for a pretty good part there, my friend. He said that, families, like a big ask now with recruits is they want a driver. Like they want someone to drive them around, take them everywhere.
A driver.
they want houses or housing for their families when they come for road game, for home game. They want an apartment where their family can live there when they visit and travel in.
Kind of glad I wasn't there for that. But
cars.
Yeah. They want a driver.
I mean,
what if I requested a driver? Can I get a driver?
And he wasn't speaking about Nebraska. He's talking in broad terms of what he has heard.
Sure.
There's certain recruits that would want private aircraft or transportation paid for. If you take a kid from California to a far place, that family might say, hey, we'll go to your school, but we need flights paid for.
Yep. Well, that's the world. I'm glad I think it's important to verbalize all of this stuff so people understand what you're talking about. But then when you meet the kids, it still feels kind of like it did in 1995. I mean, they're still young guys that they love football and they want to play. Now it just happens to be they're negotiating their terms that are real and important. And Nebraska, like I said, those guys sitting right there are big time players. Winery, McCullough, Marquise, Watson, Trent. I mean, Watson Trent's interesting to me. He's listed. I don't know, Sean, if this is correct. We list him on our website at 5'11", 190. Think about it. That's corner playing inside linebacker.
He's sitting next to a 6'6" guy and a 6'5" guy.
And I'm in no way dogging Marquise Watson Trent. He has a ton of tackles.
Well, think about Levante David.
Yeah, smaller.
When you saw him,
smaller. Yeah. No, Levante was smaller. That's what I'm saying. Like when we saw him, we were like, "Ooh, can he do this?" Now that was the Big 12, so it was a little different.
Yeah, Levante played in the Big 12, Big 10 for a year.
That's true.
He did.
Yeah, Watson Trent. I just want to be clear. He was really striking,
confident
kid. And again, a kid to sit on the podium and says, "Oh no, I enjoy mat drills." That tells you about, as far as character goes, that might tell me all I need to know about him.
Well, he beat Nebraska in Memorial Stadium, and we kind of had some fun about that. Like, you're the only guy on the stage that's played in Memorial Stadium, and you beat Nebraska and got the coach fired the next day.
Yeah. What a day that was.
He kind of apologized. I'm sorry. I'm a Husker now, but I appreciate you coming last night, Sip.
It was really eye-opening. It was a great event, and again, you get to meet those critical players. That was my biggest. That's the biggest benefit I got. I'm just glad that money's going to a good cause. A lot of money's going to a good cause, and it's a really good night for Lincoln.
All right. Final headline before we get to odds and ends. Headline 5, again, we're brought to you by our title sponsor, StayHome.Care. Call them at 402-205-2233 to learn more about them and the services they can offer you. It's never too early to call to learn more about StayHome.Care. Some odds and ends. I do want to go back to the spring games being canceled too. We hit on that with Troy Dannen and kind of what Nebraska is going to do, but Nebraska is not the only one. In fact, it sounds like they really were the ones that kind of came out first, but many people were on the same page. Texas, Ohio State, USC. Florida is teetering in that direction. Iowa's really never done a true spring game.
Don't say never, because I covered one, but it was a long time ago. It was when Nebraska first joined the Big Ten. I went out there and they played a spring game, but they haven't in recent years.
They just call it an open practice.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what they like. Kirk Ferentz has never been a big fan of doing that. So in Northwestern with Pat Fitzgerald was that way, but now though with the extended season and the playoff and everything, like Texas is like, look, we played dang near into February,
right? And like what rules says is, why put our proprietary information on TV for everybody to see? Is kind of what you're doing, and also your good players on TV for everybody to see. That's how rule paints it. Now, not everybody agrees with it. I totally understand it. Here's the thing. I don't want to leave out this part of the conversation of the businesses in Lincoln that, they might watch us and say, hey, what about us? Now, what I would say to them is it's possible that you could still get 40,000 people, 50,000 people in Lincoln on that day, right?
Yeah, you're still going to get people. And look,
can you get 50 grand?
I would have a hard time. I don't know about 50. I think that's
is that a reach?
They got 60 last year.
Right.
So I think 30 to 40 is probably more realistic, knowing what this is going to be. But I would say the economy in Lincoln for the spring, they already have some really great events that fill the city up. The Lincoln Marathon and graduation are back-to-back weeks in May.
I'm sure there's stuff we don't even know about.
Yeah, and in the spring game, I don't know how many people stay overnight for that.
Right. This is where you would get Derek Bombeck involved. There's a lot of events in the city of
like
Lincoln.
is Laszlo's, sure they're going to be busy on the spring game, but Laszlo's on a Saturday in April, you would hope is busy anyway.
Right.
I mean, like,
but it's not like a home game.
No.
So I'm sensitive. What I'm saying, Sean, is I'm sensitive to the businesses that might lose, but I don't give up on them losing money because you still might be able to attract 40,000 people. I think you could. I mean, you're going to have a volleyball match that will be very.
And Dannon's sensitive to that. I think he's going to do something to make sure people come to Lincoln. But people aren't like tailgating and partying on the spring game like a regular home. It's not the same.
No, they don't do that.
No,
it's not like the spring game. God, I almost did a double take the other day when I read that. I can't even remember that. They had 60,000 people last year.
Yep.
Jeez, it wasn't like a good game.
No.
You don't see much at all. So the loss to me is not big, except I'm sensitive to the fans.
Well, the other thing,
excuse me, sensitive to the fans, but sensitive to the businesses.
You worried about the tampering. Back to that subject.
Tampering, yes.
And what teams could do is just kind of mess with you and say, "Look, we'll just drive the price up on Nebraska. Like we don't really. We might want this guy, but we'll say, what are you getting?"
Oh,
and then they'll say, we'll give you this.
Really?
And then that player would go back to Nebraska and say, hey, I'm getting 400. They're offering me 600.
Right. So what
for
are you going to do?
And then you deal with a lot of that where you're like, gosh, we have to come up with now 200 more thousand.
That's where you get to the very unappealing part of all of this. The very unappealing part of the new college football. It's extremely unappealing. That somebody would kind of artificially
the
drive
agent-driven portion.
Jeez, let's not talk about that either. What else in odds and ends?
Well, and Dannen did say too that they won't have to share the money, and I wanted to know that. That's why I didn't know, because we know what janitors make at the University of Nebraska. We know what
they won't have to share players' salaries.
But as a university,
salaries.
Normally everybody's wage and the whole thing. But in this situation, they're going to treat it like scholarship. Like you don't know if he's a partial or full and what their packages are. So they don't have to share that a certain player could be making several $100,000
there. And
they won't be employees. They will continue the 1099 model.
Okay. So that's all good information. What else is struck you in the odds and ends? Sean?
Odds and ends. Cam Jurgens is having back surgery, but
he had it.
He's also set up to get a major, he'll be one of the highest paid Huskers we've seen in the NFL in a while.
Yeah, he had back surgery. It was this week. Yeah, he's going into the fourth year of his contract. The Eagles try to get out in front of players that are heading into their second contract, so they'll get him money now. He's making 5.127, I think. 5.127 million is the number I believe he's making if you look it up. 5+ million. So yeah, he'll be I don't know what it would get to if it would get to 8 or something like that.
No more. No. We're talking like double
annually,
15-20 million annually. A huge
starting center.
One of the best centered. He's a Pro Bowler.
Yeah.
So he would be paid as one of the best centers in the NFL. That's how they're going to, I was reading some reports on that. His deal will be much more than what you just said.
15.
I mean, it would be towards the top of the market of what center salaries
are. Yeah, good point. He's a Pro
Bowler.
Thing, yeah. And he plays on the best line in the NFL. And that line looks like it's going to have everybody but maybe one guy back. They do have a free agent. There's one free agent on that line, but that line could return intact for sure. It looks like they're just going to it might be all but one guy coming back.
And then finally, Husker basketball, man, that Penn State game was rough. They don't come back again until Monday against Michigan. Mm-hmm. Huge game. First place Michigan comes to Lincoln. But will they get Burke back? That's a huge piece to this week's game. But Penn State game just left a sour taste because Penn State simply said, we're not going to let you run your stuff. We're just going to hand check the hell out of you
full court
and just not let you get set up and do your little handoff offense that you like to run, Fred.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to force the issue, see if the officials are going to call it, and they're not going to call it. They made that pretty clear that they're going to let Penn State just put their hands all over Nebraska and not let Fred Hoiberg kind of run this little handoff offense that they really thrive off of.
Yeah, Penn State. I mean, it's interesting. We should note that Penn State had lost 7 in a row. I mean, they had lost 7 games in a row. They had lost, I think, 11 of 12. I mean, so why don't they do that against other teams?
Well, and Northwestern won at Ohio State.
Big.
So
crushed Ohio State in Columbus.
And over by 20-plus points. So
it happens.
The line right now for being a tournament team to it's not separated by much in this league. No. If you're like the 9th or 10th team like Nebraska and Ohio State are, the reality is you're a couple bad breaks away from being Penn State or being Northwestern.
Right. If you watch the game, if you watch Penn State, Nebraska, and you had no context, you'd think Penn State was maybe the better team. It's kind of scary. I've said it all throughout the season. The bottom of the Big Ten is good. It's a good bottom. Penn State was last in the league. They led Nebraska by 26 points. It's a good bottom of the league.
Penn State beat Purdue in their December game. So
what about it?
I'm just saying, like early in the schedule, before they got on that streak, people regarded Penn State as a respectable team. Like they were regarded better than Nebraska at that point.
Good bottom.
And then they fell apart. And, you know, that Penn State team played that game in Philly against Indiana. And I believe they lost that game to the Hoosiers. And they just haven't really been the same since that point.
Now, so why do you need Burke back so bad against Michigan? Here's why. Michigan, I've been saying it ad nauseum. Michigan's got 2 really good bigs. I mean, and they work together. They're 2 bigs who work really well together. So you got to have Burke back against Michigan.
Dusty made one of the best coaching stories in college basketball, what he's done.
Probably the Big Ten coach of the year right now. You don't have to vote right now, but if you were, it would be either he or Greg Gard.
And Robin's a voter, by the way, so he'll have to make that decision.
Yeah, it'd be one of those guys, but you got to wait to see how it plays out.
Yeah, look at Penn State. When you just look at these guys off the bus, I mean, they
look good. Right? That's what you're going to say, right?
I mean, yeah, off the bus, you're like, okay.
I'm telling you, the league is there. I mean, Penn State's not a great team. I don't want to sell them as a great team, but they're a good-looking team. They're tough. The bottom is good. Rutgers is at the kind of the bottom. Minnesota's a kind of a bottom team, not now because they've won 6, but they went out to UCLA and won big. It's just
there's a desperation at the bottom because the bottom 3 don't make the Big Ten tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a coach, that's a death nail.
Oh, yeah. Washington's a good example of that. They're probably not going to make it. And I was watching Washington one Saturday, and I was expecting to see kind of a crap team. Not really. Not crap. They're all right. They're very athletic, big, strong team.
Imagine being done with your season like in Lincoln before even like the boys state basketball tournament would start. I mean, that would be a bad
deal.
Bad deal. Your season would be done like when the girls state tournament begins here.
Bad deal.
That's a lot of March to chew on how bad the year was.
Yep. Yeah. So there is some desperation.
And Fred was in that camp until they went on their little run. Like they were in that spot. So
Monday night, Michigan.
All right. Well, Sip, I had fun seeing you at St. Michael's. It was great to have Troy Dannen on.
Yeah, that was big. And there's a lot to write about here, Sean. A lot to write about.
Well, we'll be back. Full shows next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. For Steve Sipple, thanks again to Troy Dannen. Signing off here for another edition of Husker Online Headlines. I'm Sean Callahan.